You're listening to Quantum Revolution with Karen Curry Parker, exploring new frontiers in consciousness, science, and evolution. Join us in intimate conversations with cutting-edge scientists, spiritual leaders, artists, disruptors, and visionaries who are working towards reframing the narrative of our future by healing the rift between spirituality and science, reclaiming creativity, and laying the foundation for a new world. And now, here's your host, Karen Curry Parker.
Your relationship with your creativity is a reflection of your relationship with yourself. What you believe about creativity reflects what you believe about yourself. Somewhere along the way, we traded our natural immersive creativity for logic, predictability, correctness, and responsibility. Our education system, built in the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and largely unchanged today, churns out workers fit for factories, stamping out creativity on purpose. Perhaps when you were growing up, someone told you you're not that creative or your art is no good, and you believed them. You may also have experienced something traumatic which understandably shut down your creative self as you had to prioritize survival over imagination. But what if the most important thing we need to do to survive is to be imaginative, to activate our full creative potential? The single biggest thing we need to heal as we face an era of uncertainty and as we stand on the brink of a creative revolution that promises to hold the solutions to the challenges facing humanity today is our belief in our own creative capacity. If we can't even imagine that there's a solution, how the heck are we going to find one? Or even know that we need to begin the quest for one? Our guest today, Jacob Nordby, author of the book, The Creative Cure, believes that every human is creative. There's no such thing as an uncreative human. Join us as we discuss why we need to cure creativity and how creativity is often the cure for our lives. Hi, I'm Karen Curry Parker. Welcome to Quantum Revolution. I'm here today with cultural creative Jacob Nordby, and we're going to be bouncing off some of the things we've been talking about all season. If you've been listening to my podcast for any length of time, you know that Jacob is a regular on our podcast, and Jacob is a regular here because Jacob lends a very powerful and insightful and I think very evolutionary perspective on what is creativity and why is creativity important. And I always like to bring him in to ground all the amazing things we've talked about in this season. So Jacob, because you don't know what we've talked about in this season yet, I want to just bring you into the circle of everything we've covered this season. Our theme this season has been creativity, something you know a lot about and you can talk about. We've been exploring creativity really through perspectives of some very interesting people. We've been talking to astrophysicists who teach at Harvard, who believe that it's quite possible that there's extraterrestrial life visiting us. We've been talking to quantum physicists, which is a pretty regular thing for us. We've been talking to people who have a big vision around reforming criminal justice. We've been talking to people who want to reform the education system. And at the heart of everything they've said has been, quite accidentally, because I wasn't even pulling this out, was this return to the idea that our innate creativity holds the solutions to the challenges facing humanity. And of course, I think that's something you resonate with as well. Would you agree with that?
Oh, for sure, Karen. I love how far afield you're going. You're doing the work that I am also involved in, which is really to expand our understanding, to reclaim the idea of what creativity even is. And so I love that you're talking to all of these people.
So, okay, what is your definition of creativity?
First of all, I would love it if we could take the word creativity apart. It's kind of a word like God or love. It's so big. It holds so many different ideas. And over the years, it's become weighted down, freighted with all of these meanings, which means that many, many people feel that they don't have access to it. They don't feel like they deserve to engage with it.
Yeah.
Which is not a definition. But if I take it down to its most core, to me, it is the spark of life. To me, it is the spark that you showed up with, that I showed up with, that everybody listening showed up with, that holds the code of our nature, of our self. And what happens is that spark never goes out. It never even dims. What happens is we create a persona to survive in this world, and the connection gets stretched further and further apart. It gets filled with static. It gets filled with fear. And many people then say, I'm just not that creative. And nothing could be further from the truth. My friend Julia Cameron loves to say, every human is creative. There's no such thing as a non-creative human.
Okay, so then what is it that causes us, and this has been my musing this whole season, looking at the criminal justice system. We've been looking at what I would say is the dysfunctional experience of doing scientific research that now is, we were sort of preconditioned to say we can have answers, but they have to come from within this box. And if they're out of the box, and we say, well, maybe there is a possibility that extraterrestrials are visiting us, we're like, no, it has to get back in the box. We have an educational system where basically from a very early age, we're telling children, no, don't look out the window, sit down, memorize your times tables, do it again and again and again, even if it takes you 12 years, get in this box. We have this whole giant collective narrative around get in the box. And that getting in the box to me seems such an antithesis to your definition of creativity. And I see people really wrestling with, well, okay, if I'm innately creative, but I've been trained to get back in the box, and I'm in the box, I'm uncomfortable in the box, I have anxiety in the box, my life is miserable in the box, but I don't want to get out of the box because it's scary. Why is this connection to our innate creativity so challenging for us and so prescribed by collective structures in such a way that we have to like almost consciously dampen it down?
Yeah. You said it a couple of different ways, but I want to come back and highlight it because I feel like it's so crucial to this conversation. Why do we create boxes? Whether that's a house or an actual cardboard box, but in general, why do we create boxes?
Well, to contain things.
And what else? No, that's one
yeah.
thing.
To protect things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like boxes. If I can just ask everyone to take a moment of imagination. Without a box, let's say a box that's called a shopping cart. We've all had the experience of going into the grocery store, saying, I don't need a cart. We walk around and start picking things up. And by the time we're to the checkout stand, we're juggling and dropping bottles of ketchup and doing all that. That's one version of a box. A box is a convenient way to carry something. It's also, think about the box called your house. It's something that humans developed over millennia, these technologies called houses, to protect us from the vicissitudes, the uncertainties of nature, whether it's weather or animals or other people. We make boxes to protect ourselves, to create certainty.
Okay, that's huge. And I think that, again, is just so beautifully aligned with what so many of the people we've been speaking to this season have been talking about, that we are collectively uncomfortable with uncertainty. Why?
I love that you're talking to so many intelligent people from various disciplines. When you look at what's happening in the brain, I was talking with my friend, Dr. Chris Niebauer, who's a neuropsychologist, and we were discussing left brain, right brain. And he said, Jacob, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and before that, but that really began to harden things down, humans were more generalists before we began to specialize, to fit into the box of what was needed for a job to survive in the Industrial Revolution and beyond. And he said we began to reward left brain activity. So it became more and more rewarded to use logic and linear goals and all of these outcome-based thinkings and turn away from what's in the right brain, which is much more ability to see connections between disparate ideas or objects, the intuition, empathy, all of these things exist in the right brain. I got all excited. I said, well, Chris, it sounds to me like what you're saying is it's almost like a bodybuilder who they tell during his young years only work out the left side of your body. And then he wonders 20 years later why he is not functional, why he can barely walk down the street. And he started laughing. He said, that's exactly what I'm saying.
I totally agree with that. And I think that speaks a lot to, honestly, the blinders that we have on that don't even allow us to interpret the things that don't fit in the box. It's like we see it and the brain is like, there's no paradigm for this, right? Which I think is a very, now I don't like to say frightening. This isn't about being frightening or frightened, but I do think that cultivating a creative practice of some sort, which is, I think, something you really espouse, is essential, not so much because, hey, all of a sudden now I'm going to be drawing pretty pictures or painting beautifully, or me and Wendell Berry will be hanging out in the ethers writing poetry together, but because training the brain to ride that flow of creative energy that is so associated with the right brain. I want to really be clear because I think sometimes we're like right brain creative, left brain Spock. And I don't think that that's fair either, because there's an enormous amount of creativity in being able to interpret patterns and being able to predict the future based on your understanding of the patterns, which is one of the strengths of logic and why we draw on logic for, say, scientific inquiry. But if we don't have a practice collectively to reawaken, I think, this creative essence, is causing us to lose our critical thinking skills and also to be blind to the solutions that have the potential to actually be right smack dab in front of our face. Would you agree?
Yeah, they're always all around us. And I love what you just said. In the idea that creativity lives in the right brain is completely false. Creativity lives in you. Our brains, each one of us, creativity is the spark that is you. It uses the machine called our brains. And what I love about a creative practice is that it can help us re-access areas and then grow new neural pathways that begin to connect these functions much more efficiently and really much more effectively. This is why I founded the new thing called the Institute for Creative Living, Karen. And your podcast series, the way that you are branching out into all these different disciplines and ideas and bringing them together, I see that there's this hub needed that says, this isn't just about the traditional arts. My brother is a very left brain dominant type guy, but he finds his art, his spark is in creating systems. It's in coding computer work. It is in all of these amazing things. Without that, or if not even without that, in his case, he always felt, he would say over and over again, I'm just not that creative. That broke my heart because I knew him. He was my earliest best friend, and we used to lie in bed together as boys and dream up these entire worlds. And I know that he's a creative human being, but somewhere along the line, the definition got him pushed out. And I want to just say this, the World Economic Forum in 2019 came out with their every 5 years study. They look at all this economic data and do massive surveys. They said in 2020 and beyond, here's the top 10 skills that you need to survive in your career. Well, creativity had moved from the bottom of that list to number 3. Other softer things like empathy and some other communication skills had actually come onto the list for the first time. So I did a study with 10,000 people and asked, what's your greatest creative challenge? 74.3% came back and said, I doubt my talents and abilities. I don't believe I'm good enough. That was a huge light bulb. I was right in the middle of writing The Creative Cure at the time. That's when I coined the phrase. The publisher didn't end up putting it in the final book, but I started the introduction out with, we need to rescue creativity from the arts. Not because artists don't get to have it anymore, of course, they always have it. It's so that everyone realizes we have the World Economic Forum, for God's sake, saying we need this. It's a critical ability to cultivate. And a vast majority of people don't believe they have it, or they don't believe they are good enough. So what I came to see, Karen, is what we believe about creativity reflects what we believe about ourselves.
Oh, that's powerful. Can you say that again?
Yeah, the exploration that I was on and still am on, it began to really solidify this understanding for me. What we believe about creativity reflects what we believe about ourselves. So this actually goes to very deep self-concepts, unconscious beliefs about the world, about our own selves. I feel like there are the 3 main enemies of creativity. And those are socialization, how we are trained, and you were talking about the school system earlier, how we are trained to become adults, how we are trained to become functional humans in the world. So socialization is one of them. Then there's rejection and the fear of it, and that's so closely linked with socialization. It goes back to the very primitive fear of being driven out of the tribe because we misbehaved or didn't follow along with the customs. So that's buried way deep in our psyche. And the third one is trauma, traumatic experiences. And by the way, I've noticed as I work with people that a lot of people will take the adverse childhood experiences assessment, and that goes on a scale of 0 to 10. And a lot of people will look at that and they'll go, I have maybe 1 or maybe 0. Like, I can't point to any major traumas in my life. So why am I still broken? And that drove me into a deeper exploration of micro traumas, or things that would never show up on one of these big clinical assessments. When you combine the socialization and the fear of rejection, those are, for many people, whether it's mid-level bullying at school or whether it's being harshly criticized at home, not beaten or abused, just in an atmosphere of you're not good enough in some way, these messages sink very deeply into our core beliefs about ourselves, about our worthiness to be here, our ability to be safe, our flexibility to create what feels true to us. So I feel like those three main things really begin to damage. They put nicks in and add static to this connection to our innate creative selves.
So you may or may not know that I also did research. I'm in the middle of still doing research about microtraumas. The World Health Organization reports that about 60% of people have experienced some kind of trauma. And when I went back and surveyed my people, what came back was more like 85%. So I went back and I said, okay, 85% of you have experienced near death experiences, violence, all those things that we traditionally define as trauma, but very few people had. I sort of had the same question. What is this experience of trauma? What's the root of it if it's not major trauma? And what I concluded is that when we internalize somewhere the message that it's not okay for you to be who you are and how you are, and you get that message repeatedly, sometimes in really well intending ways. I think about my dad telling me I had graduated early from high school and was starting my first semester in college. And I'm like, I'm going to major in literature. And my dad said, well, you can't do that. Everybody wants to write the great American novel, he said. And he said, you better find something practical to do. So I switched to journalism, which wasn't actually that practical either. But that little message that I know, looking back on it, he was thinking, oh my God, my poor child, she's going to be a starving artist. She's never going to be able to support herself. She better get a realistic degree, right? But those messages that are delivered sometimes with the best of intent that speak into sometimes our parents wanting to nudge us into the box because it's safe in there, right? That we internalize that as a not enoughness of some kind. And that begins the process then of creating, first of all, an energy suck. I mean, I think that's the first thing. It's like it becomes this tremendous energy suck because now you have to hold up this facade and try to be something you're not, right? And then you don't have the energy left over to be in that creative pursuit or to even have the eyes to be able to see other options. So when you're working with people, you have a huge practice that you bring people into around curing their creativity. In fact, that's your book, The Creative Cure. What's the first thing that you recommend that people do to start uncovering or recovering that creative essence?
Well, a couple things. The first is, I feel like, such a fundamental reclaiming, and that is, let's go back to a moment, even in imagination, which, by the way, is such a crucial ability to reclaim and use for the right purposes in our lives. Okay, so go back in imagination before you knew any of the words for things or definitions or rules for life or success or who you are or even your own name. There was a spark. That was you. And before it got trained into any way of being in the world, there was this spark, and that is your creative self. That is your creative energy. If you could just imagine that that spark has never gone out, it has never dimmed, it has never gone anywhere. And people go, that's not how I feel. And I say, I know. So I want you to imagine that it is there right now. And then I would love for you to imagine that there is this connection to it. That's what we're healing. We are not healing your creativity. You have all of the creativity. It's built into your DNA, into the code of who you are. It's already there. And that by itself becomes a fundamental shift. And then we start going into the healing of the imagination, the use of affirmations that bring us down into the creative green zone in the polyvagal nervous system, to where we become open to letting new truths and beliefs become embedded. We learn how to rewrite these old beliefs that were there for many of us. They started becoming installed in our brains before we even knew our own name. So of course they're tough. Of course they're stubborn. And so we want to be very gentle with that and create an atmosphere, an environment, even if it's just a few minutes a day. I'm working with several right now. And my assignment is, I want you to take a 5-minute a day imagination recess. Communicate to the other parts of your adult psyche, we're totally coming back. We're going to get back to the checklists, but I'm going to take a 5-minute recess, because imagination is the first part of the creative formula, Karen. What has happened for most of us through those three enemies, through the micro traumas, is that it's not that any of us loses our imagination, which, by the way, is kind of a dogma in our society. It's like, yeah, you lose your imagination when you're about the time you become an adult, or you gradually lose it. It's not true. We get trained to use our imagination to imagine things that we don't want, and which it looks like imagining risk, imagining disappointment, imagining rejection. And that is a protective mechanism. It's there to protect us from those painful experiences. And so what I say is, it's not that imagination can't be used to foresee things, but the idea is to start using it a little bit more each day, so that you regain the facility of, remember back, not everyone can do this. And I'm very careful about this, because I know some people's shutdown started so early in life that they really have a hard time imagining the open, carefree mind of a child. But when you look at all of the wisdom traditions, the Tao and Buddhism and Christianity, unless you become like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. So the idea is, this is not to walk away from all the experiences and wisdom we've gained through the process of becoming an adult, or to dismiss the left brain activities or skills we have. The idea is that we can recapture, a little bit at a time, the ability to have the experience in our minds and then in our bodies and nervous systems, the ability to take a deep breath and to imagine something. And I love to take people on a journey of imagination that isn't focused on a goal, because for many people, Karen, the idea of manifestation, the idea of The Secret, many of these things, a lot of people felt very disillusioned with that sort of thing. And it wasn't that it was all wrong. It's that a lot of people, when they try to select something they passionately desire, they'd love to create or manifest, many times that thing represents a lot of pain for them, a lot of disappointment, a lot of attempts and failures. And so what I try to do is help people simply learn how to reimagine not that thing. Simply go back into the ability to imagine something wonderful. Find a special place along the lake. Find that chair next to your grandmother. Just purely, and I now call it a right brain workout, because it's purely reclaiming, reactivating an ability that we used to have.
I think it's interesting as you're talking, I'm thinking about the phrases that are built into the way in which we even talk about things. We say things like, well, I can't even imagine. And I think, let's not say that anymore. Let's find a different way of stretching that statement. And of course,
How about it's just your imagination?
oh, right, right. Yeah. No, I get that one a lot as a woman. You hear that a lot growing up. There's that challenge. And again, I'm just marveling and reflecting on all the interviews we've done this season and thinking about how, for example, Avi Loeb, who is an astrophysicist at Harvard, said that he went into science because he thought it would be an extension of his natural childhood curiosity, and how he quickly learned that, oh, no, that's actually not the case.
Mm-hmm.
And how he's had to really fight, and how he's really having to combat people who are like, no, we're not getting out of the box. No way. And bringing people back to, hey, aren't you curious? Don't you have some kind of imagination or dream or possibility, or even just a willingness to look at data that doesn't fit in the paradigm anymore? And I'm thinking how I keep coming back to this idea that there's a certain inherent thought form, if you will, happening on our planet right now that really is this terror of the unknown, this terror of, what if we use our imagination, then what? What do you think people are afraid of, other than disappointment, which is, I think, maybe part of it? And you just talked about that. Why are they afraid of what could happen if you let yourself imagine?
I think that's such a both deep and broad question, Karen. And I just want to point out that the rate of change means uncertainty. We don't know when we're in the process of change. Forms are changing, governments are changing, businesses are changing, all these things are changing. When we are changing, we don't know exactly what's next. We don't know exactly what form will come from the change. And I want to point out that in the last 40 years, we've had to absorb and metabolize more change in our psyches, in our bodies, in our way of life than people used to have to absorb in maybe a whole lifetime or 2 or 3 lifetimes. So if people are feeling crazy right now, and I think we all probably do at times feel a little bit nuts, like what is going on? It's because the rate of change on every level of our usual lives has hockey sticked. And so we are actually required to absorb and assimilate change and our response to it. So change brings up uncertainty. Uncertainty brings up anxiety. And then we go into coping strategies around anxiety, some of which are not that productive.
And that's in the second subtext of the season is anxiety, because we have a tendency right now to talk about anxiety as being sort of a mental health issue. And of course it is.
Mhm.
But what if, and this has been the exploration that I've been engaging with people this season, is what if anxiety is actually your higher self, your creative essence going, wait, no, we're not, I can't flip the box anymore. And that we're trying to turn it down and medicate it and find strategies to keep it down here. And as Naomi Fisher said in the interview we had with her about educational reform, she said, if we dampen that anxiety, we might be missing out on the vital sense of urgency that we need to start looking at other options. What do you think about anxiety and creativity? And is there a relationship between those two?
I think there always is. I really don't feel like anxiety, as you just so well said, anxiety really isn't the enemy. I love the polyvagal research and that chart that shows the arousal curve from this ventral vagal state of, I call it the green zone, and it's where all of the best stuff lives, right? Curiosity and openness, compassion, mindful and being in the present, connection, safety, all of these wonderful things, all the things that are the holy grail of self-help and spiritual practices, right? It also has physical ramifications, good things, symptoms start to come up, like our digestion increases, our resistance to infection, and all these wonderful things. And oxytocin is released, which means that we actually can feel safe in connection with others. When I look at this, and I actually have this virtually tattooed inside my skull, and I watch it happening, I really do. When I'm driving down the road and I notice somebody swerves just a little bit, and I go into that fight or flight response of, you piece of, I can't believe, it's like, oh, wow, I just climbed the curve. And it's not that it's wrong. That is a fight or flight response. Those things are. And so is the freeze response. What I've noticed, though, when we talked earlier about a creative practice, the simplest creative practice is simply sitting down on purpose and breathing deeply and relaxing. And we can do that in 2 minutes. Doesn't mean it's doing all it needs to do in that green zone to release all the right hormones and open us up to the environment. We actually can make a choice several times a day to relax. And the part of our brain that is screaming, saying, no, you're supposed to be doing more, there's so much on your checklist, it's like, that's true. And I know that I will make more rational, better decisions if I allow myself to settle back down into this nervous system state. And that begins to open me up. I begin to see outside the box. I begin to notice opportunities and resources that otherwise were blocked because I'm in tunnel vision. And so this is probably the very simplest creative practice of all, is simply making time to relax deeply. But as my Asian medical practitioner told me years ago, she said, Jacob, you're going to have to learn how to actively rest, because it's not enough to crawl in bed and turn on Netflix and curl up and feel dark and just like disassociate from everything. She said, that's one version, but you're not actually resting because your mind is still screaming at you, telling you how much you aren't doing. And shame sets in and it actually works against what you need. So she said, you actually have to switch it into a different place in your brain that says, and maybe this visualization will help people, I'm plugging my iPhone or my smartphone into the wall, and I'm watching the battery go from 2% in the red to slowly climbing up into the green. She said, if you'll visualize that, you can actually gain the recuperation that you desperately need. And she was so right. I didn't know how to sleep. I didn't know how to relax, any of those things when I saw her for the first time.
I think there's an epidemic. And I think I see a little bit of a rebellious trend, especially in the entrepreneurial community, about X out the hustle. And I think, well, I'm not sure you can totally X out the hustle. I think sometimes you have to hustle. But if you're not balancing out that hustle with active relaxation, as you call it, and finding harmony between, and Dr. Amit Goswami talked about this when we interviewed him, and Dr. Valentina Onisor, that balance between do, be, and cultivating that balance so that when it is time to hustle, because sometimes you do, you have the resources and the reserves to be able to bring it into play and to do it more effectively because now you've consciously accessed that creative state to be able to see where is the easiest path, where's the most creative solution to what the challenge is that's requiring the hustle, maybe.
Yeah, and I just want to say too, Karen, that this was another pretty big aha for me a number of years ago was Dr. Nadine Burke Harris's TED Talk about trauma, and then the Deepest Well book. That was her book. And then The Body Keeps the Score. What was interesting to me is to see myself reflected in the mirror in ways I didn't know what to do with at first. But to understand that some of these things we've talked about earlier, the micro traumas, the fear of rejection, some of these things can actually put our anxiety set point above that green zone to the point where it's very hard, even in people who are attempting to do a meditation or attempting to deep relax, like addressing the other nicks and static in that connection to ourselves. Sometimes this takes some time. Sometimes we need the help of professionals to actually get to the bottom of, like, I didn't know why I was only sleeping 4 hours a night. I didn't know why it was hard for me to ever sit still when I was with my friends. It's like, I love these people. They're great. But I would find myself getting up. I was constantly on the move and beginning to learn that this is more pervasive than we realize. We live in a culture that is making us not feel safe all of the time. And I'm not saying the culture is a boogeyman. I'm saying we've all created this state of affairs together over thousands and thousands of years. So here we are. And this to me is really the ultimate taking back of our own authority, of our own sovereignty, is saying, I need to make the choice to heal this connection to my vital native abilities, to the things that will help me navigate and come into a relationship with the change that's all around me constantly. I need to come into a different relationship with these boxes that I've been in all of my life and that I feel forced into. I need to come into a different relationship so I can feel safe in myself, which means then I can choose the boxes I will stay in and how long I'll stay in them or if I'll stay in them. But I think sometimes there's this radical notion of I need to burn everything down and then I can start fresh. And it's like, yeah, but you might find out that you really do like to have a place to live and you like to have money to pay your bills and eat and that sort of thing. And so I think that sometimes people feel like they can't even glimpse outside the box, even poke their nose above it to see what else is available because they're like, oh, well, I'm just not one of those people who has all that courage. It's like, no, if you can find your own sense of safety, and now we're back to Viktor Frankl and some of the amazing pioneers of understanding these things, the distance between stimulus and response. If we can reclaim our own ability to begin to feel more safe, having more worth as ourselves in whatever moment we find ourselves, that actually does become the ultimate freedom break. It becomes like no matter what is going on, I can come down into a state that allows me to take a deep breath, that allows me to respond and say, what is my relationship to this circumstance? What do I need right now? How do I feel about this?
Beautiful. So I always like to, at the end of our interview, ask our guests to take a moment and envision, if you will, in the name of sparking imagination and possibility, how would you envision the world changing, especially in the context of a future world where creativity is no longer dormant? We're walking around with bodies that are balanced between left and right, and we're able to really access that creativity. How would that look? What would that feel like? Paint us a Jacob Nordby vision of the creative future.
I would love everyone right now to imagine that we're in a time of renaissance. This is a high renaissance. There are freedoms. There are doors that are open that were never open in the course of human history. I'd like everyone to imagine that they were born in this moment, in this time, and they weren't born in the wrong time, and they weren't born outside of a system that keeps them away from everything that they would love: healthy prosperity, healthy relationships, healthy ability to create and be significant in our world. I would love if you would imagine that this spark that came here as you has every bit of intelligence, it has every bit of courage and resourcefulness and resilience to pull back to yourself all of the power, all of the creativity that you need to live a beautiful life, and to not just live a beautiful life in isolation, but to, in the expression of yourself as a truly healthy cell in this vast body that we're all part of, that as you reclaim the joy, the health, that you naturally spread that health to those around you. And as you do that, you are changing the world.
Beautiful. Well said. Do take some time, all of you, to enjoy that vision, not just now, but maybe as part of your 2-minute daily imagination practice. You can find Jacob's book, The Creative Cure and Blessed Are the Weird, anywhere where you buy books, good retail outlets. I encourage you all to check out Jacob's Institute for Creative Living.org. And if you go there, there's all kinds of good ways for you to begin the process of reconnecting back with that spark, that core essence that is you, that once in a lifetime cosmic event that you were born to be. Jacob, thank you so much as always for joining us, for giving us your beautiful, not counterpoint, because it's not a counterpoint, but just an augmentation of everything that everyone has said this season. It's always an honor and really just a beautiful joy to spend time with you in any way that I get to personally. And I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Well, I love you, Karen, and it's always an honor to be a perennial guest whenever you want to bring me back. I just want to say that I love you, and I love all the people who have gathered around you, because I know there's this tremendous desire to do all the things we're talking about. People who are in your sphere, I just know they're the type of people who really care enough to go through the process of change and healing.
That is so true, and I appreciate you for acknowledging them, because I find myself saying many, many, many times a day how amazingly blessed I am to be part of a circle of, I think, global change agents, whether you're a listener, whether you're a student, whether you've just stumbled across us and this is your first time you've listened to us. Because you're here, I know that you are here to change the world by virtue of your existence. So thank you for being here, and thank you all for being who you were born to be. We stand in the midst of powerful and uncertain times. How we respond to the uncertainty that is ahead of us lies in our ability to imagine the possibility of a solution and knowing how to activate our creativity. Creativity lives in between a stimulus and response. It is the space between an idea and a manifested potential. If we're going to innovate, create change, and build something new, something better, we must become sovereign over how we respond to the stimulus. If we keep pulling the same solutions out of the same box, we not only run the risk of not finding the elegant solution to the challenges ahead, we also continue to keep ourselves trapped in depleting cycles that lack innovation and new possibilities. To change our response and activate the full potential of our creative essence, we have to explore what lies in the gap between stimulus and response. Are we letting our social conditioning, all those places where we were told that it's not okay for us to be who we are and how we are, stop us from seeing the elegant solutions? Are we letting our trauma that created patterned responses rooted in anxiety, self-destructive talk, inner criticism and self-doubt, procrastination, perfectionism, addictive behaviors, or feelings of not being valued control our response to the uncertain? Are we letting our fear of rejection stop us from activating the courageous solutions that demand that we step out of the box and find something new? Whatever it is, if we don't first begin with imagining that there even is a solution out there, it will be challenging for us to find a new way of creating in a new world. You want to unlock your creative potential and reclaim the space between what triggers you and how you respond? visit www.quantumhumandesign.com to learn more. I'm Karen Curry Parker. Thank you for joining me for Quantum Revolution.
Thank you for joining us on Quantum Revolution with Karen Curry Parker. We hope you found this conversation inspiring. For more information on how to change your world and to hear more about our guest today, visit quantumrevolutionpodcast.com. Make sure you follow us on your favorite podcasting platform so you don't miss a single episode of Quantum Revolution. We'll see you next time for some more groundbreaking conversations with Karen and her guests. How will you impact your world today?